All right. Welcome, everybody, to our November book club. Glad to have you all here. So we're going to speak about Bewilderment by Richard Powers. Before we start talking, though, I see our dear Kate is on with us. Today is Kate Montgomery's birthday, and she is in Japan. And she is making her way. She's taking a birthday trip inspired by the Overstory and Bewilderment and some of the other books we've read. So she is heading to an island in South Japan, and she's going to see a 7,000-year-old tree. So, Kate, I don't know if you say anything or not, but happy birthday from all of us.
Happy birthday.
All right. So maybe I think she's going on the ferry to get to the plane or vice versa. So if she can pop on later, she will. Okay. So Bewilderment. We chose this book knowing that it's a beautiful book that's going to rip your heart out. And we did it anyway. Sorry. But we just thought it paired so nicely with some of our other book selections, Clara and the Sun and Diary of a Young Naturalist, that it just seemed like the right book to choose for this month. And so James is going to share some of his thoughts, and then we'll just do our discussion. So here we go.
Hi, everybody. I'm sorry to say that for some reason my Zoom is not allowing me to see everybody. I can only see whoever's speaking and Nancy. So since I'm speaking, I'm unfortunately looking at myself and Nancy. So, but I have a good friend in Los Angeles who wrote me an email about the book, and he said, I didn't read your the newsletter until after I'd finished the book, and he said, I understood what you meant by the young people being a sort of message of hope. He said, but I have to tell you that the book just made me unbearably sad while I was reading it. And that it made me sad, but I never kind of lost a sense that powerful ideas were at work in the book that gave me a sense of the young people in the world getting it more quickly than people my age did when we were their age. Of course, it wasn't as serious then, or didn't seem to be. It probably already was. But when I got an ARC of this book, an advanced reader's copy, many months ago, there was a note in the book from Richard Powers, not a personal note to me, but a note published in the book, which I just assumed was going to be in the regular edition, but it turns out it isn't. So there's one paragraph that I thought would be a good way to kick something off, and then I have a question that I want to for everybody, and we'll take a little raising of hands of how many people think one thing and how many people think another. But this is from the middle of this page-long note that Richard Powers wrote. He says, children possess enormous emotional intelligence, but adult illogic can defeat it. While finishing my previous novel, The Overstory, I kept reading accounts of the toll our growing environmental catastrophe is taking on the young. A new word, solastalgia, seemed to take hold overnight. I began to see how we were raising a generation of troubled kids born homesick for a place they never knew. And we adults were relying more and more on a single response for treating the epidemic ravaging our children's mental health: medication. And so I think in those in that paragraph, he kind of takes all of the sort of personal stuff in the book and opens it up as to why he was, fascinated by this idea. He goes on to talk about a niece and a nephew that he knew when they were young, and both of whom had complicated childhoods, and one grew up and succeeded at becoming a successful adult and the other didn't. And he wonders whether the one who didn't, if he'd had a different kind of, way of being helped, he might have become a different human being. And then he also talks right at the beginning about Flowers for Algernon. And of course, if you've read, and Flowers for Algernon's talked about in the book, but if you'd read Flowers for Algernon or seen the great movie from the 60s, Charlie, you sort of knew how it ended. And so that should have been a giveaway that you knew how this book was going to end, but it still was quite shocking. But it felt right somehow. It just felt right to me, as complicated as it is. So I'll stop, except I wanted to ask, one of the things that he brings up very early in the book is one of my favorite conundrums in life, because I heard it talked about many years ago. But he very early, when he and Teo are down in the Smokies, and they're talking about how many stars are in the sky, and it ends with this little part. It's on page 8, at least in my copy. It says, "He was a boy attuned to loss. Of course, the great silence hurt him. The outrageous size of emptiness made him ask the same question Enrico Fermi did over that famous lunch in Los Alamos 3/4 of a century ago. If the universe were larger and older than anyone could imagine, we had an obvious problem. Dad, with all those places to live, how come nobody's anywhere?" And Fermi's question was, why hasn't anybody gotten in touch with us? If there's so many planets in this vast universe where life must exist, or surely it has to be out there somewhere, why has no one gotten in touch? And later in the book, Powers speculates that, or the dad speculates privately, that one possible answer is all of the advanced cultures have sort of come to the end of their development and have slowly died out. But so I just had a question of words. I can't see. Nancy will have to count hands. But I mean, how many people believe that there's life out there somewhere, and how many think, nope, we're the whole show? And how many, I suppose there's a third option now, how many think we're just in a video game from some other place somebody else is playing? So what are the counts, Nancy? How many people believe in that there's life else?
I think everybody had their hand up.
Oh, well, that's
Some I can't see their hands, but the vast majority.
That's exciting. Okay, good. All right. Well, I hope they show up. I'm going to be really mad if nothing happens before I go wherever we all go when we go somewhere. Okay. Thoughts, comments about the book, or things that it made you think about, or?
Diane?
Hi, Diane.
Well, hi. I loved it, but in response to what you just said, on page 136, Robin kind of responds. He goes, "That's why the universe is silent, Dad. Everyone's hiding. All the smart ones, anyway."
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm kind of a sci-fi geek, and I emailed you and Nancy earlier. Nova actually had a show on last week about the Kepler telescope and the search for exoplanets and everything, which was kind of, great timing. But I kind of think if anybody's out there that's smart enough that they've seen us, they're not going to contact us. They're going to say these people are way too stupid and way too primitive, and they're destroying themselves, and we're just going to pass them by. So just kind of my opinion.
Yeah. Responses to that? I mean, I there's a part of me that believes that too. Yes.
Yes, that's my feeling too. I mean, it's kind of a standing joke, for lack of a better word, that why would anybody want, we're too messed up, and it's like not worth more intelligent species time to try and fix us or something like that. Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of factors at play because there's so much time and distance. So if somebody developed radio 100 years ahead of us and were spewing out radio waves and stuff, we would have never have received those because they would have passed Earth 100 years ago before we knew all about it.
Right.
And if they went on to some other form of communication and we're listening in the wrong way, so there's a lot of other factors, but I tend to agree that intelligent life was put out separately enough that you've got to become mature before you're able to, not just technically, but as a species, mature enough to go find other life and recognize it as such.
Right. And accept it as such.
No.
Yeah, I also think that it's important to think about life as not like Earth. And I think there's one point in the book where either Robbie or the dad mentions that life isn't necessarily like it was on Earth. I forget where that was. I can't find it in my notes, but I think that's important to think of life as different.
But I'm going to take a lighter note on that and bring us back to Third Rock from the Sun, and to say, how do we know they haven't been here?
Right. Good point. I know that's an excellent point. We should call John Lithgow and find out if that's really.
Naomi, did you have something you wanted to say?
I was going to add, and I think this was kind of mentioned earlier, though, that so-called intelligent life on this planet has been here for barely the blink of an eye. And the way we're going, which I think this book points out pretty well, we're not going to be here much longer. So we just haven't had enough time for anybody to find us before we manage to destroy our home.
Yeah.
Sorry to be a downer, but.
You guys hear about the joke that was going around at the COP climate conference in Glasgow?
No.
It's two planets meet and they're talking to each other. And one planet is a beautiful blue marble and the other planet's all brown and dirty looking. And the blue planet says to the brown one, it says, what on earth happened to you? And the brown planet said, oh, I've got humans. And the blue planet says, don't worry, they don't last long.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Any other comments on that? What about the love relationship between Robbie and Teo, the father and son? I mean, son and father, if I said it in the wrong way. But, What do people think about that, the father-son relationship?
Having had raised a child with some issues at various times and been the father in that kind of a relationship almost, and not as severe, nowhere near that, but it did strike true. I mean, it was a loving relationship. It obviously was strained on both sides, but you have both people with positions that they don't understand the other. They're so they're doing as best they can in that area. But I think there was a true bond between them, and that carried through to the end.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I thought it was very realistic as well. Kids are challenging, especially a child like that, where you can be proud of how intelligent they are, how thoughtful they are. But sometimes you want them just to, sit down and watch a cartoon for a while, stop asking so many questions. I'd like to know what everybody, your feelings of the path, the emotion pathways, or I can't remember what he called them. Is that something anybody would try, to feel somebody else's memories, feelings?
I found it, yeah. I found it really uncanny and rather spooky. I mean, I'm really interested in empathy and how we empathize with one another, but it went way beyond that. I mean, it's sort of, there was kind of a almost like a merger of thought personalities or something happening that I just felt from the very beginning, this isn't going to end in a good place. It was disturbing to me. I mean, it was comforting for a while, but it was disturbing on some level. I mean, I think I don't know what I was doing, hearkening back to Orwell or something, or things I've read about thought control or something. And so it was disturbing to me to be tampering with such a delicate mechanism, I guess, It's fascinating and disturbing all at the same time, if that makes any kind of sense. I don't know. I don't know how I'd hit other people.
Well, and he has that there's a quote that I wrote down this afternoon where he's watching, Dad is watching Robbie kind of become more empathetic, which seems to help him in the short term to be more aware of his effect on people and people's effect on him. But then he begins to think, the quote is, more empathy meant deeper suffering. And he was comparing it to his wife, and how much his wife had suffered because she took on so much, she empathized so much with animals and with, the whole. And I thought that's a really complicated issue, but I know, Allison, what you mean. I mean, and typical of Richard Powers, he says in that same note from the author, he says, in my early 60s, when I came across an account of a remarkable new therapeutic technique called decoded neurofeedback, he just thought, well, what kind of human could we end up becoming if empathy could be the sort of driving force that we take on via other people's brainwaves. But yeah, I know you have that complicated response, Allison, that I think is a lot of people would have. Yeah, but you're altering someone in a way that is quote unquote unnatural. It's very complicated.
I agree with Allison about being very troubled by it. And in my case, even more so, because as I was reading the book, I got an announcement from Duke Law School, which I was from where I graduated, and they were having a special, Zoom webinar on the ethics of brain research and and individual rights to their brain activity.
Yeah.
So that clearly it's, of course, I did not attend. I don't know if there was anything even like this that he was describing, but clearly it's enough that it's caused, there's even a legal group of, that legal and medical ethicist group that focuses on the brain studies in particular.
And I spent most of my career working with medical researchers. And one of the more fascinating things that I did was visit with a group that had taken military spyware software that was used to analyze photographs from satellites, and they applied it to microbiology. And they got to the point where they could look through a microscope and see cell transfers, ion transfers at cell walls by using this military software. So it was just an amazing thing in terms of what they could see. Now, it didn't get into the ethical thing. All they were doing was observing, functions at the cell level. But it's not too far a step to get off to the psychological and to see that may be possible. And it is spooky.
Well,
I didn't think it was as spooky as a lot of people did. That seems like, I feel like the initial description of the therapy, to me, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, that seems like something that we could be doing now. Like, for people who have different, like, dissociative disorders or like other mental health problems, that could help like train their brain to just process things in a different way. And that doesn't necessarily like give me the heebie-jeebies. I think that in the book, the thing that I felt frustrated by was, I felt like Theo was projecting a lot of his own grieving process onto what was happening with Robbie that wasn't necessarily there. And Robbie was doing the same thing. So then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that like, they're both using it to kind of get close to the mom. And so like, if they had done the project with a different brain scan that wasn't his mother, I feel like it would have been a completely different scenario, though of course then you don't have the book, because that's the whole kind of meat of the plot, right? But the technology in itself didn't seem like the issue to me. It was how Robbie, and particularly how Theo handled what happened from that, and what meaning they attached to it, that ultimately led to the results.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think it. I mean, the therapy exists. I don't know if they're using it in the way they use it in the book, but the therapy is an extant therapy. But I agree, Caitlin, and it was hugely complicated, of course, and this is a typical novelistic device by having the scientist having Theo suspect that his wife and the scientist had been lovers at one point. And of course, never being able to really know that would make his emotional responses very, suspect maybe. I mean, that you wouldn't know, that he couldn't see it without that lens of his wife's friend. But it's interesting that Robin seems to be doing well before he seems to be doing quite well before they use the mom's brain scan. So, but that's an interesting way that you brought it up, Caitlin, because then you sort of lose that part of the story, that he was doing better, and then his own excitement about his mom, kind of takes over. What did people think about the mom? Oh, I'm sorry, somebody had a comment. I'm sorry.
I just want to ask a question, because I may be mistaken, but wasn't it? I mean, when they first started, weren't they talking about using the emotions of like groups of people or different people or something like that? am I making that up?
No, I think that's right. I think it was, I think so. I think it was a large focus group, and then, yeah, they were.
And then they went to his mother's.
Yeah, to the specific mother situation, because they wanted, I think, because she had been studying they'd been covering her brainwaves for ecstasy. Right. Yeah.
And the researcher saved hers, but not Theo's, which was kind of interesting too, that, when he said, oh, you saved him, and he said, well, only one of yours, your wife's, not yours. But I mean, I thought it was very cool. And I wondered if Robin had been allowed to continue, if there would have come a point where it would have been so embedded that he wouldn't have had to continue doing it, it would have become part of him. But there was a part of me that also felt a little nervous about it, like Allison said, that it could be also probably used in a nefarious way too.
Sure.
Depending on who was using it and how they were using it.
Yeah.
I mean, another way to look at it too, I think, I mean, I agree with you, Diane. I mean, I think that, another way to look at it, I mean, here's two grieving people, and how are they dealing with their grief, but, being connected to sort of the mind and in some ways the soul of the person who they've lost. And I thought, amongst other things, that it was a very interesting portrait of grief, of parental loss for the child, of spousal loss for the husband, and then how I happen to come from a family where a parent was lost young, but how a family tries to reconstitute itself, or how they cope, So, I mean, the contact with the mother, as it were, should have been really healing, and yet it got confused, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then I thought, just as a sidebar to that, to the grief, he has that when the son asks if they can get a new Chester, get a new dog. Powers writes that when the dog died, a year after Robbie's mother, that he really came apart, because he'd been sort of holding his grief in for his mom, and then when the dog gave up, I think that's maybe even the expression Powers uses, when the dog surrendered to gave up, that the son just collapsed completely. And so we attach that emotional weight to various members of who we come into contact with, be it parents or wives or pets or whatever. It's it really is a fascinating study in grief, which is one of the most perplexing things we all live through, and sometimes are judged for if we have more grief than someone thinks is appropriate or whatever. It's such a difficult idea. I'm just looking at my notes. Did anybody? I just remember certain critics being, I guess maybe a little annoyed at the tone that Powers chose to use for Robbie, for the son, in the way that he spoke, and how kind of how open and expansive and I guess, if you're going to think of it pejoratively, platitudinously he spoke sometimes. Was anybody bothered by Robbie's way of speaking?
James, I haven't talked yet. I've been waiting for the right moment. I have to say, I've never read this author before, so I can't compare it to anything. But I would tell you, I think this is one of the best books we've read this year. I was up till 4:30 in the morning on Tuesday finishing the book because I could not put it down. And even though I had a lot of middle school students read Flowers for Algernon, I think I might have taught the shorter version of it one time. I still was hoping for a positive resolution. And the thing that struck me when I was reading the book, I had to keep reminding myself that it was fiction, because I thought the father, the son, the mother were all totally believable characters. And I was surprised when the bad president won re-election, because so much of it seemed like it was ripped from the headlines with Trump. And then I was like, oh yeah, it's fiction. It's not Trump, it's somebody like Trump. But I thought one of the key scenes was when the son said to his dad, what is more important, outer space or inner space? And the father answered inner space, which was a surprising answer, given that he was obsessed with finding life in outer space. And I agree with Caitlin about the experiments. Again, I know it's not real, but in the context of the book, I'm like, wow, this is real. And it's amazing that Robin is being transformed and coping. And I was really hoping that he would not regress. And at some point, I hope we'll talk about the ending, because I still don't know how I feel about the ending, because the mother, the dog, to me, that was enough grief right there. And I don't think the father was ever going to recover from this third type of grief. The other thing I want to say, I thought it was a wonderful depiction of Madison and the farmers market and the Capitol, if you've ever been around the Capitol with demonstrators and everything else. And that just fed into my feeling like these are real people, this is happening. And I was shocked when I looked up the New York Times review, which just totally trashed the book and said it was like his favorite third grade book, Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And I don't think the book was anything like that. I thought the dialogue, the way he wrote about the characters, I was just totally captivated. I did not want to stay up till 4:30 in the morning, but I had to.
Thanks, Dara. Yeah, that review, Dwight Garner's review, has become profoundly infamous in the world of writers. I mean, he got a huge amount of pushback about that review, and of course, you're entitled to have any opinion you want of a book, but I think people felt it was sort of insufferably glib and hard to read and unfair in a sort of personal way. Well, all I can say to Larry is well, first of all, apropos of the feedback itself, Powers is started out as a scientist, and he's also a very, very intense research-driven writer. That's how the Overstory happened. He started getting fascinated about trees, and the more he read, the more he felt he had to write this thing. So I would assume that much of what he writes about the biofeedback in the book is happening, because I just don't think that's how he operates. But I think you should try take on the Overstory, Larry, because I think that'll also, in a sort of totally opposite way, it addresses huge issues. But he is uncanny, or I think he's gotten better and better over the years. One of the complaints about him early on as a writer, everybody admired him, but they felt that he was chilly, that his characters weren't particularly three-dimensional, that much like Tom Stoppard's complaints early on in his writing, that it was just kind of, intellectual showing off rather than really building people from the inside out. And I think his last 3 or 4 novels, Orfeo and The Overstory and Bewilderment, are just so beautifully driven by the characters. But I was interested to hear you say that. When you jumped in like that, and you started by saying, I haven't read his books before, I was expecting the next thing out of your mouth to be, and this sucked, and I'm never reading it. Never wrote, so.
I do own the Overstory. It's just a matter of finding the time to read it. But do you know that the Overstory is being made into a miniseries by the showrunners who did Game of Thrones?
Yeah, that's exciting. Well, I hope it's exciting. And the Game of Thrones part took me a little. Yeah, well, it's a fabulous story to try to tell. I just can't imagine. Just casting that would be so difficult, I think. Well, let's take off on what Larry just said. I mean, did other people have a kind of that response to the characters? Did you find them real? Did you? Is that what held you in the story, or was it something else?
Well, as somebody who's lived in Madison for over 35 years, I mean, it was just like, yeah, this guy had to have lived here in Madison to give that level of detail. And so, yes, it made the characters feel, very real. I had wanted to, I should look all this stuff up and see if this type of, the research or the biofeedback, whatever it was called, was real or not. And I didn't do that. But yeah, I had a bit of trouble with the father. He seems so passive and unsure about everything, and I just kind of like, dude, you're a scientist, kind of get a grip, kind of wanted to shake him, and because he just was always, well, my wife did all this stuff and I'm like kind of like nothing, and I'm like, okay. So I just wanted them to have more of a backbone. But maybe that was part of the grieving, but it just, it's just like, and okay, your kid has something, autism or whatever, and instead of all this trouble in school, say, hey, here's where my kid is at, and we need to, get him help at that level, or acknowledge it. And I was just frustrated with that part of the story. So
yeah, but that's good. I think that kind of frustration by itself says that you were engaged. Yeah. So
I had the frustration, but I did feel too, like Larry said, in terms of feeling it to be something real. And I had spent a fair amount of time in the 90s in Seattle at UW, and learning the difference between UW and UW in the story as they went into that. And I spent way too much time with researchers, so I felt comfortable with all of that. But the characters were real. It was the first time I ever heard Human Subjects Committee being the villain. That I knew about the committee structure, so I had some concept, and it really felt as he did. He did his research, and it took you into that world.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. As far as I know, I mean, he taught at the University of Illinois in Champaign for a long time, and he taught at Stanford for a long time. And in fact, the Overstory kind of started because he was on a hike in the redwood forest above Stanford, and he encountered this 1,000-year-old tree, and he couldn't believe that this tree existed. He was so overwhelmed by it that he started learning about the redwoods, and then that, segued into all the other research that he did. Yeah, I was just looking in the section of the book. It's pages 97 to 99 or 200 or 100 when Theo goes and talks to the scientist who's working on the decoded.
James, is it Theo or Theo?
I don't know. And I'm just thinking of it as Van Gogh's brother. So I don't.
Well, it wasn't Van Gogh's brother's name pronounced Theo?
I've always heard it Theo, so I don't know.
Theo.
Is it?
It is Theo?
It is Theo.
Okay. Good to know.
But it could be, this could be Theo. That's just because my ear hears it as Theo. I don't know what it really was. We'd have to write an email to Richard Powers and find out.
I think go with James's version of Theo because in Spanish it means I love you.
Yeah. That's nice. Forgot about that. Having flunked Spanish at some of the best universities in this country, I should have remembered that. But, anybody else have comments about the characters or the?
I was wondering, I'm trying to remember because it's been a little while since I read the book, but there were a few mentions of Theo's backstory of like how he was kind of a rough character until he got into science and then met his wife. And I remember being struck as I was reading that as like, why is this important? Or I don't know, I didn't feel like that really translated to him as a person as we went along. Like it was always kind of like a why do we keep bringing this up? Because it doesn't feel like it's actually translating to anything tangible.
Yeah.
Maybe because it leads to his confidence. Like Barbara's talking about, he didn't seem to have much confidence in his reaction to Robbie, and it sounded his parents were bad, so he had no guidance how to be a parent and hadn't been expecting to be a parent. So perhaps Powers gave him that backstory that he had no good role model as a parent.
Yeah, I think I think if that would be the strongest reason, I would agree with why that story exists, because he keeps saying how all the damage he's afraid he's doing to Robbie by being a bad parent. I don't know.
I felt like it also pointed out how in many ways he was emotionally dependent upon the wife, to sort of complete. I mean, he kind of looked up to her, and to kind of complete him in a way or something. And then he didn't have that anymore. So he was kind of blundering around on his own, trying to deal with, his own grief and the grieving child, without her there to kind of mediate and help negotiate and balance stuff, maybe emotionally.
Yeah, that's good. Huh. Here's because this is the sort of thing that Larry does, and some of you else do too. You do pick out favorite paragraphs and things, but yeah, there's a paragraph that I not only have it entirely underlined, I have 3 stars next to it and the page number circled. So I feel like, whoa, that's. But here's the paragraph. It's Robin and I walked from the neuroscience building to the lot where I was parked. He held my forearm, chattering. He hadn't grappled me so much in public since he was 8. Decoded neurofeedback was changing him as surely as Ritalin would have changed him. But then everything on earth was changing him. Every aggressive word from a friend over lunch, every click on his virtual farm, every species he painted, each minute of every online clip all the stories he read at night, and all the ones I told him. There was no Robin, no one pilgrim in this procession of selves for him ever to remain the same as. The whole kaleidoscope pageant of them parading through time and space was itself a work in progress. And it's, it does, you think about what you just said, Allison, and the death of a spouse, the sudden, unexpected death of a mom and a spouse, and how much that alters the path of your life, and all of the ways that people influence you, the casual comment, if you talk about good or bad parenting, saying the right thing at the wrong time, or the wrong thing at the right, all these million ways that we're altering ourselves and the world is altering us constantly I just think that's one of the things I've always loved about the way he writes is that he's kind of always seems to deal with both the micro and the macro simultaneously, and just reminding us that that we're just being bombarded constantly by things that are changing us and affecting our the arc of ourselves. The fact that I happen to, here's an example. I happened to know someone when I was in graduate school who 15 years later told a director about me, and that director told David Frank about me 5 years later, and that's the reason I came to APT, and that's the reason Arcadia exists. It just, in other words, your path gets off on, that you don't know that you're on a new path, and all of a sudden you look back and you think, man, if that one thing hadn't happened, maybe none of the rest would have happened. And I just think that that's also part of the bewilderment of life is how bewildering it all really is. That it's, and the cosmos and what's on this table. It's all bewildering in a powerful way.
Well, I really love that phrase. Was it the pilgrim in the progression of selves? Is that what it was? In a way, we're all pilgrims in the progression of being selves and becoming selves, and
right.
Changing from day to day.
So we can all wonder how this book affected us.
No, true. It's true. Other things that are memorable from the book, or things that you want to bring up, share?
Did Robin have to die at the end?
Oh, yes, right. You wanted to talk about that.
Yes, I wanted to talk about that, yes.
Because he was such a good fictional version of the young man who wrote Notes of a Young Naturalist, I think subconsciously I was like, well, his activism helped heal him and helped overcome the bullying and everything else. So in the back of my mind, I'm like, this is what's going to happen with Robin. And I thought the father was going to save him, and then he's dead, and we're supposed, it was like, no, this was like, it was like too much. But maybe that's why the book was so powerful, because it's so upsetting that he died. I don't know how it would have worked with a happier ending, but I'm really curious to hear what others think.
Well, to me, it felt, I want to say a cop-out, but it was like, I got to end the book, so we'll have Robin die, and we'll tidy this all up, and we're done, and goodbye, everybody, and it's just like, it just felt too easy in a way to end the book. That's just,
to me, it felt like a cop-out in the sense that it felt preventable, and that's what was so frustrating. Like I was reading it and yelling out loud, just do something, because I felt like he could have tried to take him across the river. Like the likelihood that he actually could have gotten him to safety or gotten him to warm enough that he could have saved him is like slim, but it just felt like there was a point where, because of the situation, Theo felt crippled to the point that he just chose inaction in a way. And that was just like so maddening.
But isn't that exactly kind of tied to the point about the concern about environment and nature disappearing, people not acting to stop it and just keeping on going with their same way. So in a way, your description of the ending is a perfect parallel to the themes of ignoring the dangers to nature that are throughout the book. I do think, I was terribly disappointed because that relationship was so close and you'd seen some improvement in Robbie, and okay, there was that setback, but you hoped that there would be something else. So I was very disappointed too, but I also remember thinking all the way along throughout the book, something bad is going to happen. So that seemed to be.
Yeah, I kept thinking about the flowers in Algernon and something bad's going to happen, and didn't expect Robbie to die, and so that's what makes the book more memorable, I guess. But yeah, I wish that didn't happen that way either. But then I don't know where else he could have gone. So
Yeah,
To me, it felt like something bad was happening throughout the entire book. I found Robbie very believable. He's a really intelligent kid. A little outside, the average, the norm, which is why he was bullied, and having the dad he had that allowed him to homeschool in a really good way, and all of that. But this kid was so aware of all the chaos and calamity and tragedies in life. To me, the whole book was sad in that respect, whether, Robbie made it through or not.
Yeah, I kind of didn't think, I almost thought I didn't specifically think he was going to die at the end, but again, like, most of the other people, I thought something not good was going to happen. I just didn't see a way for him to survive this world, when you looked at the meltdown he had over the cows and just everything that was going on, you could kind of see that there was no way he was going to survive what was happening in the world around him, one way or the other. He was not going to make it.
Yeah, I think that may be true, but I'll just, does anybody else want to comment on any of that? Because I had kind of an oddly different reaction. I felt like the dad did what was the sensible thing to do, which was to try to raise his body temperature. He tried to do the one thing that he could do without risking him more. Meaning, had he chosen to try to go someplace and the boy died before, and Robbie died before he got to the car or whatever, I would have thought I should have just used my body heat to make his, to bring his body temperature back up. I also felt, and this ties in with Diane's comment, I feel like Robbie had already made this huge contribution to the world through what he had been brave enough to go through with the experiment, and that in a way he'd already won. And so, his life had huge meaning, and people knew about him and understood that could be helpful, and so that other children could, if they get the funding back, and if the bad boy president ever gets out of office and they start giving money to science again, that things could. Things will be better partly because of what he did. And I do think he because Richard Powers talks about the price that people pay for empathy, that the fact that his empathy had risen so much that he might have, you know, you die of a broken heart. So I felt, yeah, I feel like he'd won. He'd won something really crucial by being brave as a boy. And so of course I was devastated by him dying, but then after I asked myself, well, what if he'd lived? What if how would I feel if, you know, if he'd clung to life and the father had saved him? And then I started thinking about exactly what Diane said. I mean, I started feeling about how is this boy going to live in this world? And I hope like Dara McAnulty and Greta Thunberg and the other, you know, teenage wonders in the world, that perhaps his sympathy would have turned into something wonderful. But I didn't feel like it was that it was a waste. I felt like he'd done something really great, and he'd had this fabulous year, and so he, you know, reconnected with his mother in a profound way, and she'd opened his heart. And, you know, we don't know how much time we have, any of us. And so that was just, the whole thing was a gift in a way to me. So anyway, Nancy, are you there? Nancy?
I am. All right. Cindy sent me a message. A quote that resonated with her was, but a child's question is the start of all things. That is a lovely quote.
Say that again,
But a child's question is the start of all things.
Oh, yeah, right.
One other thing James and I noticed today is that there's no afterword, there's no author's note, no acknowledgments. So it's almost like he wrote this book as his Theo's memoir. You know, I thought that was interesting. I can't recall another book that I've read that just ended, that there was no author note, no acknowledgments or anything. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. And there really isn't you know, any author information as well.
Yeah. Yeah. We're here and then we're not.
One thing no one's mentioned yet are the interspersing chapters describing the planets, like the Bedtime Ritual, which I really thought was like the coolest part of the book, of like how that really highlighted what Theo in particular was going through, or how he was processing his relationship with Robin throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, I agree. They were like bedtime stories, and they were just fabulous. Just, God, they were so good.
Well, to those things, I tried to figure out if they were connected with what Theo was going through, but after a while they seemed to not be connected. And then towards the end, because Robbie would always exclaim a couple times, it's like, Dad, this is a magical planet, or, you know, he'd come out with these observations like that. And so to me, the whole thing was a love song to our planet.
Yeah.
Because these other planets had life and they were wonderful, and it was amazing to see how the life was eking out, or how it evolved through the uniqueness of that planet. But there was always something limiting the other planets.
Yeah.
And Robbie would say, yes, but we have this amazing planet here.
Yeah, that's nice. Well, and I took them that these were things that these were models he was creating from the research he was doing of what what might be out there, what's plausible. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I agree with you that it's nice. They become ways to feel like a story, but it's based on his own research, and then the real lesson is that Robbie can say, yeah, but Dad, this is right here just as good or better, Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it that way. That's really nice. That's great.
And I mean, that's how the book ends too. The last paragraph, oh, this planet was a good one. I mean, the last paragraph is, I think, quite beautiful. And, there we are, with the blue-green marble.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's hope we stick around for a while anyway.
All right, Kate, are you at a spot where you can talk?
Hi, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so tell us where you're going.
I'm going to an island called Yakushima. Actually, I'm not standing near anyone. I'm taking this. If you've ever seen that movie, the Studio Ghibli movie, Princess Mononoke,
Oh, yeah.
that's the island it's based on, I guess.
Wow.
So I read Bewilderment. I've been a huge fan of Richard Powers for like 10 years or something. I read the Goldsbug variations first. And then as soon as this book came out, I bought it and read it in like a day. Like Larry, I stayed up till 4:30 in the morning. Like I turned the lights off, went to sleep, and then was like, no, I have to know what happens. So I woke up again and kept reading it. And I decided, because they go into the Smokies for Robbie's birthday. So I thought, I haven't taken a vacation in years. I'm going to go reconnect with nature in a similar way. And then having read the Overstory recently as well, I thought this island is really famous because it has like one tree that's 7,000 years old, and then a bunch of trees that are only a few thousand years old. So some young guys mixed in as well. And it's one of those like protected World Heritage sites. And I thought that would be an amazing place to go just in general, but it's something that I really wanted to get back to some kind of nature, like outside of the disaster megacity where I live, because I think I started thinking about this with Bewilderment, because the way Robbie views the living world, it's almost like he doesn't see a separation between humans and other living things. Like ethically speaking, everyone's on the exact same level. And so I think I was reading a book about, I don't remember what I was reading, about trees or something about how trees evolved over time and how all species evolved basically from the same little organisms back in the primordial soup. And so technically we're all relatives of each other. We're all relatives of the bugs and the animals and the trees and the plants. And so kind of going to a place where that's made really in your face was something that I was interested in doing. And one thing, I've been like running constantly this past hour, but I've been trying to listen as well to what you guys are saying. One thing James said that I was thinking about a lot is the idea that we're constantly being bombarded by things, and that shapes who we are as people. And something that I find really potentially dangerous, but also potentially inspiring, is the fact that we're also people doing the bombarding. Like we have a responsibility to everyone around us. So it's something I have a fight with my boyfriend about a lot, because he has a lot of like anger issues when he's waiting in line and someone is too slow or something like that. And I always think, it can completely change a person, maybe on a really tiny level, if you choose to interact with people with patience. Not that I'm doing that all the time, like I'm not a saint, but if you try to choose to act with patience, with empathy, which is something that Allison's character was quoted a lot in the book saying, treating everyone with empathy, or whether you choose to be kind of angry and destructive, and just making those kind of micro choices throughout your day can end up making the person that you talk to feel a little bit better. And then maybe the person they talk to, they start being nicer to them. And it creates this kind of like butterfly effect of niceness. That sounds so stupid, but it creates a butterfly effect of being kind and empathetic. And if everyone can do that, not just to other humans, but also to the rest of the living environment, then it can set off this amazing chain reaction where there might actually be some hope for this planet, and then maybe the aliens would want to contact us, like everyone was saying earlier. Maybe they'd change their minds and say, oh, they're not such assholes after all. So, these were the thoughts running through my mind as I read the book and was listening to you guys. Thank you for listening.
Kate, have you been watching Ted Lasso?
Oh my God, I'm obsessed with Ted Lasso. Yes.
Well, you just expressed the message of Ted Lasso. Kindness and
Yes.
love is the alternative to the hate that a lot of people are thriving on.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's such a good message.
it is. You shouldn't, and I think the real important part of that, Kate, is that we shouldn't think of it as being silly. We should just think of it as being true. You know, and in other words, we live in this kind of easy, ironic, cynical world, but so that people are made to feel that if they're being kind and generous and empathetic, that they're a fool. But
Yeah.
you know what? They're wrong. We're right. If you're kind and generous, you're gonna win one way or another if you just keep believing in that. So good for you. That was great. That was your speech was the best way to end the event. That was great.
Oh.
I agree. And so next month you can show us some pictures of the trees, and hopefully there aren't any bad monkey encounters. Those of you that were here last month know what it's monkey encounter. All right, that was wonderful, Kate. Thank you. So next month is our holiday wrap up, when everybody can share their favorite book of the year. It doesn't have to be a book that was published in 2021. Share a book that you loved or you would recommend. So we're going to meet on Wednesday, the 15th at 6 o'clock. So come and let's just chat and enjoy each other's company. So
Great.
Thank you everybody. This was another fantastic book. I said to Kate earlier, you know, it's like Claire on the Sun. We probably could have talked about it for another hour. There was a lot to unpack that we didn't even get to, but thank you all for your great insight and your time and your enthusiasm for this book.
Yeah. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.